In this capsule, we are asking the question, why have comics and graphic novels not been included in university study? Should they be included in university study? And we're also following that up with trying to answer the question, why are they now being included in university study at a number of major universities, not just in the United States, but around the world? The first reason that comics and graphic novels have not been considered a serious academic pursuit, I think has to do in part not with the substance of graphic novels, but rather with the genre itself. Comics are by their nature a combination of both art and literature. Literature considered in a broad sense. So it's not easy always to know how to approach an interdisciplinary type subject like that. That is to say, if they are primarily art, and you can make a strong argument that they are art, again broadly considered, but if you just put them into the category, say, of pop art, then they have a home, they have a recognized home, they have a respected home. Just consider the pop art of Andy Warhol and other pop artists. So they are art, but does that mean this kind of study belongs in an art department? In some sense, yes, and in fact you are finding comic studies in art departments, and you're even finding the opportunity for students to pursue the development of the talent that goes into this kind of work in their university study. However, there's a lot more to a comic than just the art, so that's not going to give it all of the treatment that it needs. So we would then ask the question, do comics belong in a literature department? And in some places you are finding comic studies in literature departments. But if that's the case, then how would those in literature departments evaluate the graphic content of this type of book? Many people in literature departments wouldn't necessarily have the training, the background, the theoretical study to properly evaluate this kind of art, even if they have the talent and the training and the intellectual, the academic equipment to look at the substance, to look at the writing, the story form of comics. And that's not hard to fit in. You have many literature departments who have folklore studies now. You have literature departments that have film studies, if film studies are not in a separate department. So there's a natural fit there, but again, the difficulty can be how to fully take advantage of the graphic content of a graphic novel or of a comic. There's one other department that is perhaps suited for this kind of study, and although it may not bring all of the training, all of the background that you'd find in an art department and a literature department to bear on this kind of study, nonetheless it does have the background and a certain posture toward interdisciplinary studies, and that would be departments of political science, and especially those in political philosophy. And as I'd stated in the introduction, that's the approach that I take with this kind of material. That's not to say it's the only place to do it or the best place to do it. Rather, it is one place to do it, and you're finding this kind of study in political science departments as well. So we might say that one of the reasons that we've not found academic study of comics and graphic novels more than we have in the past has to do with a bit of perplexity about the form of this type of novel. But there's at least another reason why there's been a reluctance to look at this kind of material, and that would be, I don't think it's hard to understand or to appreciate an attitude that comics and graphic novels are a low form of culture and don't have a place in the university, don't have a place in academic study. That may be the case. That remains to be seen. That's perhaps the reason why this particular genre ought to be studied. That's a case to be proven, something to be concluded. However, we're already at a point when many universities have reached that conclusion and have decided that though comics are a form of popular culture, they aren't necessarily a form of low culture. And since universities have now become more interested in popular culture and contemporary studies, then comics are much more easily finding a home. Now, if we add to that the trend that we're seeing in many universities toward interdisciplinary studies, then we can understand that there is even more of a welcome home for this kind of study. So that has provided even more of an entrance for the study of comics. Finally, there has been, and this goes to the distinction between comics and graphic novels, there has been a growth of graphic novels. It's an outgrowth of the comics tradition. Graphic novels, and in a moment we'll talk about the distinction between the two, but graphic novels are often self-contained. They're not a series, and because they're self-contained, they can often deal with sophisticated subjects, especially political subjects, social subjects, in a manner that comics are unable to do because of the serial nature of comics. So what then is the difference between a comic and a graphic novel? This is still a matter of a fair amount of debate in the university, and not everyone agrees that there is a difference. But if you're going to make a difference, and it seems to me that it's useful to make a difference, then the first point will be the one that I've just mentioned. And that is to say that a graphic novel is self-contained, and it has a storyline that goes from beginning to end in the same book, in the same graphic novel. For that reason, there is the possibility to develop a graphic novel more like you would a piece of literature or a book. And furthermore, some of the subjects that are being developed in graphic novels are of a very serious nature. One of the most popular graphic novels has to do with the Iranian Revolution. Another has to do with the conflict in the Balkans. Another has to do with genocide in Africa. Now, we're going to have the opportunity later to ask the question, is that a good way to look at those subjects? I'm going to argue that it is a useful way to look at the subjects, not the only way to look at it. But for that reason, it is important to make that sort of distinction. Now, that isn't to say that a series of comics may not accomplish the same thing. Indeed, it might. And furthermore, you're finding now that a series of comics is usually, as long as it's sufficiently popular, it usually is being bound into an annual volume. Now, it may be an ongoing project, and so you have volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, but that does provide the opportunity for the writer to pursue a certain storyline, and that storyline, at least within a year, would have a kind of a trajectory that we would expect in a novel. There is, though, criticism between the distinction between comics and graphic novels that we should acknowledge. That is, going back to this idea that comics are a low form of culture. There are some, especially traditionalists within comics, if we can use that kind of phrase, who argue that the term graphic novels, and even the evolution of graphic novels as opposed to comics, is a way of trying to make comics more respectable. And those critics argue that it's sort of a way of cheating. You're changing the genre as a way of trying to make it respectable. I don't think that has been the case. I think rather the appearance of graphic novels and the respect that they have been able to enjoy is actually reflected back on comics, so that they are themselves now taken more seriously than they have been before.